Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby.
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. I am Rivka Rivera.
And I'm Frank Capello. And apologies to our listeners up top. I am traveling this week and I forgot my microphone. So using the good old laptop microphone, hopefully the audio quality, it shouldn't be too bad. How do I sound to you, Riv?
You didn't travel with your means of production, Frank? What the fuck? You sound good. I mean, you're not going to sound as good as me, but...
That's true. There's no chance. And I never, ever do, even with my microphone.
Oh, that's the only answer to that. But you're traveling.
Yes, I'm here for a wedding, family wedding, down in San Diego. It was lovely. The wedding was in Balboa Park, which is like San Diego's Central Park, essentially, and it was at their big outdoor pavilion, and we turned around during the ceremony and there was maybe like 50 random park goers who had just like decided to sit down and watch the wedding, and we're like, that's so sweet.
That's so sweet.
Yeah,
That's
it was very
fun.
nice.
Well, love is in the air. Bridgerton season is here. I know you don't
that's right.
watch, but I'm fully in, and it's always a reminder of like, I think we touched on it once in a premium episode, but we never fully went in, and maybe we'll make it happen, because what a fascinating show about like just sucking the dick of imperialism. That feels, I don't know why that feels so crude. I'm sure I've said cruder things. Sorry, audience. My brain is fried, so that's what you get. But it's a world in which they don't really deal with race. Like, race is not a thing, but class is. But they make a class look really like, without racism, the fact that there's royalty and like slaves essentially, or I don't know, feudal system is still, it's great. The only problem was all the isms, but this works for us. Everyone's happy with this system.
Yeah, it is. We've talked about it a little bit before, and
Yeah.
my partner also watches Bridgerton, and you're right. It's very much the liberal fantasy of a post-racial society, but one in which class is never addressed.
Yes, you said what I was aiming for, but I've been teaching all day, and middle school kids have fried my brain.
I mean, I thought Suck the Dick of Imperialism was pretty good, so...
Oh, God. Well, speaking of dicks...
Oh, yeah. We wanted to talk a little bit about one of our greatest comic minds of all time, Mr. Jerry Seinfeld, has been in the news recently for some comments that he made on, I think it was a podcast or radio interview, where he, essentially said that the extreme left has ruined comedy because of woke. I think the actual quote is, you used to be able to come home and turn on a sitcom like All in the Family or, The Facts of Life, and you come home and you can't do that anymore. That doesn't exist anymore. Like, he literally said something like that, which is just so asinine considering that, I don't know, Abbott Elementary is one of the most successful network sitcoms of like the last 10 years. But okay, thanks, Jerry Seinfeld.
You just expected there'll be some funny stuff we can watch on TV tonight. Well, guess what? Where is it? This is the result of the extreme left and PC crap and people worrying so much about offending other people. Mm-hmm. When you write a script and it goes into 4 or 5 different hands, committees, groups, here's our thought about this joke, well, that's the end of your comedy.
He was just sort of adding on to this discourse from these, Gen X boomer comedians that do not know how to adapt with the times. And I don't know, because it's not okay to be openly racist or sexist or homophobic anymore. They're all like, oh no, you're trampling all over my freedom of speech. I mean, I'm legally allowed to say whatever I want, but like people will get upset if I do. So yeah, just felt like another useless addition to this discourse that comes up every once in a while about how the left makes comedy impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's been a pretty I feel like this has been a pretty consistent complaint from all of these folks. This like continued whiny drawl of like, you just can't be funny anymore, which just has the same vibe of like, you just can't touch titty anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just all the same fucking drony. And I think
I can't tell my secretary that she's got a great ass anymore.
Hey, yeah, you know I didn't mean it like that. Like,
It's a
shut the
compliment. It's a
fuck-
compliment.
Like, maybe just be funnier. Maybe, like, learn to have more than one lame-ass fucking joke. Like, it's so annoying. But I think beyond that, what I noticed that really perturbed me, and it's kind of I feel like it comes with this whole vibe, but you've been hearing a lot of this from comedians like Seinfeld, but also I just think from folks who share his annoying worldviews, that there's this idea that Gen Z are just so obsessed with their own comfort levels, and they're so needy, and this generation is just like, it's their issue is that they just like need to like, just this idea that there's, I guess as millennials
They're
had
too
it as,
sensitive. They're too
too
sensitive these days.
and it is interesting because they are a generation that's skewing more left, so a lot of that it sounds very like, oh, you say the same critique about the left, like what the fuck is wrong with being sensitive? I think there's a difference between being unnecessarily reactive without processing or thought, but also, okay, that shit aside, they're fucking not. What is comfortable about fucking staying out in protest in these encampments, in these shitty fucking dollar tents, not leaving, putting their bodies on the line? What is comfortable about putting their bodies face to face with the fucking oppressive NYPD or wherever the fuck they are?
Risking their degrees, risking their careers,
Yeah.
their reputation, risking getting doxxed.
It's such fucking bullshit. And I understand, because I, when I'm teaching, not necessarily even Gen Z, but even the generations coming up, like, that sensitivity is actually very well earned. These fucking generations came up through the fucking shitty, horrible economic system, the like collapse of capitalism, COVID. So what they're calling is like just this sensitivity, get with it. Like, fuck you. You never fucking had to deal with the shit they have to deal with. They're coming into a world that they don't know that is going to fucking be climate existence. The amount of anxiety that these generations have to struggle with, the amount of existential dread that like none of our generations ever had to deal with. Like, yeah, like, I don't know if they're worried about fucking comfort, maybe about being fucking alive. Like, please. It's such bullshit, and they're so disconnected from like any kind of empathy. Like, they just are so selfish. It's like, you only give a fuck about like your fucking jokes, you piece of shit. Like, retire, get out of here. Wow, I feel like I just went on a Frank rant. Like, I feel like
That was good. No, I didn't want to jump in. We might, Harvey K might text us and say, wow, a lot of choice words, a lot of 4-letter words this week. But other than that, I think we're fine. You know what? It's funny. I'm realizing actually that, the Seinfelds of the world, they're the coddled ones. He got to come up in an entertainment industry where he got to, do his sitcom, put out his stand-up specials, go on late night shows, say whatever he wants, and no audiences ever had any recourse to tell him what they thought about him. So he got to come up in basically a bubble, a completely insulated bubble where he was shielded from really any kind of criticism, unless someone was going to like write like a written piece about him, or if, at a live stand-up show, if like maybe an audience member came up at the end and was like, hey, that joke made me feel uncomfortable. So these people are the ones that are coming from a completely coddled existence. And now that we live in a world where the internet has democratized the way that people can use their voice, and everybody can use their voice and find a platform to use it, they're like, whoa. I really preferred it when no one was allowed to talk to me, and I didn't have to hear any of the criticisms, and I didn't have to learn that I was making mistakes or evolve or grow past that. I actually want to go back to that. So yeah, I think Seinfeld is actually the sensitive one.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah. Also, I really hate when these people, especially liberals, do this thing where they conflate the extreme left with the extreme right.
Yeah.
And he didn't do that specifically in this clip, but this thing that we hear that's just like the extreme left, the extreme left. I don't even think these people could fucking define what they think the extreme left is, even if you put them on the spot. And it's such a dangerous overgeneralization and conflation. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know anyone on the so-called extreme left that I would deem dangerous or, too radical or anything. From my experience, talking to socialists, talking to communists, talking to anarchists, everyone's just like, yeah, it'd be really cool if, we had healthcare and our country took care of unhoused people and, all of our tax dollars weren't going to, forever wars. That's what the extreme left is. And I hate it. I hate this reductive bullshit that we hear from these people. Last thing I'll say about Jerry Seinfeld is that he did date a 17-year-old when he was 38 years old. So
he's a fucking disgusting.
So he can shut his pedophile mouth right the fuck up.
Oh gosh. We should do this more. We're recording much later than we normally do, and I think you're getting us at a loopy time, so you're welcome.
Yeah, I've just been working all day, and now I just have so much pent up energy. But let's get to our conversation for today. Before we do, just want to remind our audience that we do not sell ads on this show. We donate our ad space to leftist or progressive organizations. Instead, we rely completely on community support to keep the show going, and you can do that by subscribing to our Patreon.
For $5 a month, you get access to new bonus episodes and our entire back catalog. Our Patreon link is in the episode description in your podcast player, or you can find it at mvcpod.com. Also, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on your podcast player so you don't miss new episodes.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with our conversation about Whiplash with Kelly Kaufman. Sometimes the problems of the world feel overwhelming, like there's nothing we can do. That's why we want to tell you about Ember Cooperative, a group dedicated to breaking down the challenges we face into meaningful actions we can do in our daily lives. They highlight ways that we can all think and do differently to shift norms and forge a more humane future.
For example, the Ember Co-op team recently analyzed the racist and politically motivated war on drugs, which has ruined countless lives and devastated entire communities. Their action guide includes ideas such as hosting a living room conversation about the intersection of addiction and incarceration, supporting reality-based drug education at your kid's school or in conversations with young people, or, if you are the 1 in 4 U.S. workers licensed or certified for your work, advocating for fair chance licensing. You can read the full guide at ember.coop.
For their next project, Ember is addressing the need for more diverse forms of activism beyond just signing petitions and donating money. You can follow their work at ember.coop, or if you'd like to get involved, you can apply to join their team. Add your skills to this small think and do tank where you'll have equal say in what they do and how they do it.
Learn more at ember.coop. That's ember.coop.
All right, today we are joined by Kelly Kaufman. Kelly is a Puerto Rican Jewish comedian living in San Francisco. Wow, we love a short and sweet bio. Kelly, welcome to Movies versus Capitalism.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
I'm so happy. When you reached out, I was like, another Jurican? Of course we're going to have you on.
So, Kelly, you live in San Francisco. We kind of met you through a mutual friend and friend of this podcast, CJ Kep. You're in the comedy scene there. So tell us a little bit about, your experience doing comedy in San Francisco, and then I guess like whatever you consider to be the intersection of that and sort of this, this anti-capitalist political tendency that we're exploring.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm pretty new into comedy. I've been doing it about 7-8 months. And I think I've lived in 3 cities at this point. I was born and raised in New York City. I lived in Los Angeles for a few years, and now I live here. And I definitely feel from a cultural and artistic standpoint that San Francisco is the most intact with that. I find that a lot of the old architecture is still here, good amount of family businesses and mom and pop shops and thrift stores and things like that. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely gentrification here and prices are really hiked up. I'm just saying in comparison to New York and LA, I've just noticed that it's more prevalent here in terms of preservation of culture and art, and people are really nice and supportive here in the artistic scene, as opposed to, I didn't really do much in New York or LA, but when I visited New York back in the winter, because my family is still there, I did do open mics, and something I noticed from a capitalism standpoint is like all the mics cost money there, which
Yeah.
is kind of ridiculous because it's just like a place for you to practice. You're an artist. You know, I run my own open mic out here and it's free. I also open it up to the community out here in my neighborhood, and I would never ever charge a comedian to like practice stand up for 5 minutes. That's just crazy to me.
Well, if you feel that way about New York, then I would recommend never doing open mics in Los Angeles.
Oh, okay.
I was doing comedy out there for a little while, and it's even more of what you're talking to. The competitiveness, the commercialization and commodification of stand-up comedy. I think just by dint of LA being where movies and TV are, the stakes feel higher, so it sort of engenders this really competitive vibe, even at open mics. Like, I remember being at some open mics and being like, I haven't felt this, not bullied, but like I'm unwell. Like, I haven't felt like this since high school, where it's just like, I feel like there are cliques, and I feel like some people are like the cool kids, and they really don't want to let you in if you're new to the scene or if they don't think you're funny. And yeah, it can be really discouraging.
Yeah, which is hard because stand-up is such a vulnerable art form. And I feel like to just be in an environment where people are like that, it feels nearly impossible to try to hone and refine your art, let alone try to become a professional and do it as a career, which I felt like was also the vibe in Whiplash. The orchestra was very much like that too.
Yeah, I feel like we should get into this because you're getting me hyped to talk about this film. As you mentioned, you chose for us to watch Whiplash, which warning, I'm fresh off watching, so I'm a little hyped up. That movie gets me going.
Wired.
Wired. So Whiplash is written and directed by Damien Chazelle. It stars Miles Teller, J.K. Simmons, Paul Reiser, and Melissa Benoist. The budget for this film was $3.3 million, and it grossed $49.5 million worldwide.
Big hit.
Big hit.
I mean, big hit comparatively to its budget, for sure.
Yes. And I think big hit. The movie follows Andrew Neiman, a jazz drummer and first-year student at Schaefer Conservatory of Music. As Andrew pursues his humble dream to become the greatest and most famous drummer of all time, he comes under the tutelage of legendary jazz bully Terrence Fletcher, the conductor of Schaefer's illustrious studio band. Luckily for Andrew, his passion for becoming the greatest is matched by Fletcher's commitment to psychologically abusing his students to unlock their full potential. Absolutely brilliant synopsis, Frank.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm having a lot of fun writing these. And I should also say, if you've never seen the movie Whiplash, stop listening, go watch Whiplash. It's like 90 minutes long. It's unbelievable, and you do not want any of it spoiled in this conversation, and we will be spoiling. So some historical context for when this film was released. It was released on January 16th, 2014. Although I gotta imagine, I didn't look into this, but it probably had like a festival release, maybe the year earlier or something like that. But its theatrical release was 2014. This is the first movie we have covered from this year. What's going on? Barack Obama is halfway through his second term as president. This is the first year of open enrollment for state healthcare exchanges as set up by the Affordable Care Act. Remember that? Remember when healthcare.gov went up and then crashed immediately?
Oh, yeah.
In February, Jimmy Fallon becomes the host of The Tonight Show after a bitter feud between Conan O'Brien and Jay Leno, resulting in Conan leaving the show. At the 86th Academy Awards, nominees included American Hustle, Captain Phillips, Dallas Buyers Club, The Wolf of Wall Street, and the winner, which was 12 Years a Slave. In August, 18-year-old Michael Brown was shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, leading to massive protests and civil unrest in the city and across the country. In September, ISIS militants release an online video showing the beheading of American-Israeli journalist Steven Sotloff, prompting a renewed American interest in the war on terror. And in December, the United States and the UK officially withdraw their troops from Afghanistan, marking the end of the 13-year-long war in Afghanistan.
Wow.
Holy shit.
What a year.
Jesus.
This feels like a lifetime ago, 2014.
I mean,
10 years ago. Isn't that wild?
An
That
official
is
decade.
An official decade. It's actually terrifying. but not as terrifying as some of what happens in this movie. So, Kelly, we like to start off by asking our guest, why did you pick this film to discuss on this podcast?
Yeah, okay. So this is one of my favorite movies, and I hadn't seen it in a while, and I watched it again last night, and it definitely brought up a lot of new feelings I didn't catch the first time I watched this movie, so I'm definitely going to delve into that. But anyways, there's a very intense grind culture in the scene out here. And, I'm 32. I have a full-time job. I work at a hotel as a front desk agent. I'm also in college. And then I'm pursuing a stand-up comedy career. And I just have personally been struggling to live up to the grind culture standards of becoming a success or like establishing a career. Because I do want to one day like be able to make a living being a stand-up comedian and actor. Because I had a situation recently where like I could have lost my job, because of so much effort I was putting into stand-up. Like it led to like lack of sleep and mistakes at work, and it was very eye-opening, and it's just forced me to go down this path of like, what is working hard? How can I work hard? Is there another way to like achieve your dreams, become successful, and enjoy the fucking process, like without killing yourself? Can you still be one of the greats or whatever your idea of great is or whatever without quite literally almost killing yourself in the pursuit of a dream?
Thank you for sharing all of that, because that's an extremely real struggle for working class artists. The trying to figure out how to balance pursuing your career, commitment to your career, doing the actual work, and then having to materially provide for yourself. It's not really an exaggeration to say that people pursuing an artistic career who are seriously pursuing it kind of have to have two whole separate careers or jobs, especially like working class artists. You need to do like whatever 30 40 hours a week just to pay the rent, and then you got to do another 20 30 40 hours a week pursuing your art. It's an almost impossible balancing act, and it's one that has the potential to strip the passion and love and enjoyment out of the very process of creating art, because you're sacrificing so much on one end and not feeling like you're getting enough from the other end, and all for the hopes of just like, I mean, at least in my experience, not even to be like, we're talking about Andrew Neiman in this movie who's literally like, I want to be the greatest drummer of all time, which is like, shut the fuck up. Just like, chill, bro. But for me, I just wanted to eat. I was just like, I'd just be happy to have a career where no one knows my name, but I get to go write and make funny stuff all day. That's my dream. And yeah, and then after enough time, it just like, it really, really wears you down.
That's so interesting. I totally relate to Andrew Neiman. I think I was like, no, I will be the greatest and the best. I remember, but I did. I've been doing it since I was really young. I went to a performing arts high school. And I think what I love about this movie is how clear it is, how this culture and this system, like, yeah, it's Andrew, but he's one of hundreds in this culture, in this world, who like you get the sense that everyone in that orchestra has the same idea. We're just in Andrew's story. And we can get more in how the film does this, but Marx has this idea of the army of the unemployed masses. He's referring to the pool of the unemployed that exists to maintain capitalism. These are students, so they're not yet unemployed, but you just get the sense that everyone is in this thinking they are the star of their own movie, when really they're just expendable. And we see how that's used by Terrence Fletcher as a manipulative tool of power to remind them, like, I'm telling everybody they could be the next great drummer. And the way this works is you all actually need to have that dream and that ambition. And our culture is going to take advantage of the fact that you probably did just have a love for music. We see that video that he looks back on of himself as a young kid playing, and how ambition under capitalism takes advantage of that true desire, that beautiful initial dream, and morphs it into this grotesque drive. And that's, to me, what this film is all about. And then all of the abuse that comes along with that. So when I say I relate to that journey of thinking I love this craft and I want to be the best at it. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to be really good at your craft and what you do. But then you get into this system that is dependent. It depends on you believing there can only be a 1%. There can only be one Bird or Charlie Parker. There can only be one greatest, when in reality, I think there's room for everyone to be really good at a craft. So I think Andrew's journey is like, we see how he just loses almost worse than his own life, because at some point you see in like a very Red Shoes Black Swan way, he doesn't care about his physical life, but he loses his soul. Like, he loses his actual purpose as an artist. I think the screenplay is fucking brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
In just the structure and how it does that. So I really related to Andrew being like, I'm going to be the fucking best.
Yeah, me too. That's why it is a struggle to keep the comedy in balance and prioritize a job, because I know I have what it takes to be the best and I can go hard like everyone else, but I will lose my job. Like, I will fail school. Like, I'm not someone that can function on 2 to 4 hours of sleep a night, you know? Like,
yeah, I don't think many people can. I think that's sort of a lie.
You know, because like there's this scene where he just gets so obsessive about like every time not being about art that he like moves his mattress to the conservatory, like the studio, like he's sleeping in the studio, like he's barely eating. Like, yeah, it just gets so toxic and out of balance.
Well, and it's antithetical to the creative process. In my experience, you need sleep. You need like deep sleep and deep rest and time to be relaxed and playful and let ideas come, which is really different than this version of success and this version of the best, which again, he gets there, but how many people are destroyed in the process? And like, is he even the best? I had those questions at the end. I felt like at the end, I'm like, I don't even know what that means anymore. He played a drum solo, but I don't think he's the best. Like, I'm pretty sure he's destroyed. He's done.
I have a theory about this kind of like dynamic of younger artists and like this grind set culture that we're discussing here. And I don't have any data to back this up. This is just like a theory that I have. But like, especially in fields like music, a lot of the new artists that explode onto the scene tend to skew younger. And my theory is that younger artists just have more creative stamina and energy in general, like kind of how we're talking about. Like when I was in LA pursuing everything, and you might disagree with this, but like I was like from 22 to like 29, I was in a full fucking sprint, was just like, I'm gonna crank out as much output as possible, as much as I can, all the time, go, 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 go. And then once I started getting into once I was approaching my 30, I was like, man, I'm fucking tired. Like, I can't do this much anymore. So I think I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I think young people benefit from just being younger and having that stamina, but it's not something that's sustainable and it's not something that's healthy, and I'm not condoning it, but it's just something that I've always it's like a pet theory of mine.
I'm sure there's a mix of that, and I'm sure it's probably also ageism massively, and probably
Sure,
the
yes.
fact that like that is the age range where you can really do a lot of brainwashing, like a lot of like the cult of capitalism can get in there deep. And I think with growth and with hurt, some people will start to wake up to this and, you know, realize like, my body, this is not worth it. This is not making sense. That's kind of what I love about the relationship between Andrew and Terrence, is that as it goes, there's so many opportunities for him to wake up to the monster that this is. And the script is great because sometimes you think he may and he goes back in, but you see what an addictive relationship is. And I think some people some people with age wake the fuck up and get recovery and maybe find other ways to explore their art and also the fact of like economics. And I don't know. What do you think, Kelly?
I think it's interesting when you guys were talking, I just thought about how often we hear about really successful people and how frequently it's mentioned the lack of sleep they get, like in the pursuit. Have you noticed that? Like,
Yeah, like J-Lo. That's like J-Lo's whole
like-
thing, right?
yeah, like J-Lo, Rihanna, you know, this woman isn't good anymore, but Elizabeth, forget her last name, the woman that,
Holmes.
you know, Elizabeth Holmes 4 hours of sleep a night to invent this little kit that just could cure all illnesses with a needle prick. That's just crazy. I feel like that's so capitalistic in and of itself, where you're just this machine and there's like this deep inherent shame of like if one person can prove that they can do that and succeed, then everyone else should be expected to do the same. And if you can't, there's something wrong with you and you don't have what it takes. And when I rewatched Whiplash, there was a lot that I noticed that I didn't pick up on before. Like, for example, towards the end of the movie, he's sitting with that lawyer, right? And that lawyer reveals how Sean Casey, the previous student, actually died, that he hung himself. I felt like that was kind of a message of like, some people literally do not survive this kind of brutality, right? And then the subsequent scenes, how the movie ends was, you know, he gets invited to, I think it was Carnegie Hall, right? It was a really big deal, really big concert. And he stumbles, but he ultimately wins. Like, he ends up bursting out into his own random solo, and then everyone follows suit with him. But at the very, very end of the movie, it's so subtle, but I caught it this time. You think he's like down to just two sticks going like this, you know, like you think he's ending, right? And then Fletcher has him go back up. And he hits his drums at the end. There's a silence. And then Fletcher cues the whole band to make this big crescendo to Neiman. And the lights get brighter. I don't know if it was like really subtle, but it was like, boom, like you made it. And then there's this close-up that cuts to Fletcher smiling, but it's just his eyes and he looks like the devil. Like, he
brilliant shot.
Literally, you know, and he's like his eye, like, and it's literally just like here. And what I got from that was, oh, he is saying that he succeeded.
I think that's a totally valid interpretation of this film, because you're right, it ends on the climax. It ends on both Neiman and Fletcher both achieving what they set out to achieve, so it feels like a win. It is a win in the moment. I think there's also the fair interpretation that this is just like one giant cautionary tale, and while this moment is, you know, a high for the two of them, and Andrew seemingly got what he wanted, you know, maybe he is Sean Casey in the next 5-10 years. You know, maybe like this is the high, but like this abuse and this trauma that he endured and everything he put himself through will ultimately lead to his demise. I don't know. We don't know, because you're right. It does. Chazelle makes the choice of being like, this is really fucked up what this guy does this whole time, but it kind of works at the end.
Right. It doesn't show you what happened. Essentially, it's saying it worked.
Yeah. Kelly, can I ask you, did you attend any kind of like art school, conservatory? Did you have any kind of similar arts educational experience like this movie?
No, I did go to drama school in London a couple years ago. Overall, I would say it was a good experience.
Riv and I met in theater school, so that's why I asked to see if we
We've
had
been
that shared
traumatized
experience.
together.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've had some experiences with teachers. Like, there's a teacher in LA. I audited one of his classes. I did not decide to go with him, but I had actor friends that went to this guy, and he was a psycho. Like, the class would start at 9 p.m. and it would go all the way till 3 a.m. and like literally no breaks. He sensed that you didn't do like any of your homework, or like that you just weren't working enough like on your character, whatever. He would just like decimate you in front of the class. You know, I think he was on coke or something. Like, he was just and I had a friend that had a seizure from it because just the hours.
You know, what you're describing in your experience in a class, I've had experiences like that in class. This acting teacher that you're describing is unfortunately one of many. And that to me has very little to do with acting and the pursuit of art, and everything to do with the fact that there is an industry, a very capitalist industry, being able to make money off of these careers, and particularly to make money off of, I'll go back to this idea of the army of the unemployed masses, that there are a whole bunch of people for many different reasons who want to learn the art form of either acting or music or pursue it. And that genuine desire, which I think everybody should have access to that exploration. I deeply believe that, and access to learning the skills to pursue it, regardless of, like, it's meaningless to be like, if you're the greatest, but that is such a useful ideology if you want to get people to keep coming back and keep spending lots of money and to keep staying in competition, to say, well, you could be the greatest, but you need this, you need more, you need me, you need this guru teacher, which I thought this film was all about, how that deifying of one person has the answer, one person has the key. And there's such a history of that. I mean, I'm most familiar, as I'm sure, as I know Frank is, with how that exists historically for actors. But I mean, this film is obviously about music, but I think it captures all of it. Terrence tells the story of, Charlie Parker became Bird because Joan threw a cymbal at his head. And like, that just captures it all, right? Oh, well, do I give a shit more about my physical body, or do I want to become Bird? And why do I need to become Bird? Because that's the only musician that we know in this industry. Like, it's not explicit, but I feel like the film is always hinting at the greater context.
Well, it's that dangerous cliche that great art requires great suffering, which is like which is like very dangerous and completely bullshit, and also completely unsustainable. I mean, Riv, I know you probably, and myself, we've had moments in acting classes where, and Kelly, maybe you as well, where that abusive teacher does break you down to the point where you're completely vulnerable and present and spontaneous, and then you do end up doing some very strong acting or whatever your artistic, expression is. And I mean, I like we could get into like the psychological theories behind why that happens, but like it is a thing that has happened. It is a thing that I've experienced, a thing that I've witnessed. But so what are we supposed to like make ourselves, are we supposed to like absolutely destroy ourselves before every time we're going to try to perform, every time we're going to create art? It's a completely unsustainable model for engendering creative expression in people, if like the only and it's one that will eventually accumulate in like massive amounts of trauma and PTSD. So I think it's such a dangerous idea, and one that I think is like pretty brilliantly explored in this movie.
Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this and, feeling like, oh, I don't know, I never conceptualized these things. I think like even what you're saying, Kelly, is like these things are meant to feel inside of us. And the way that's like how capitalism works, right? Like it's hard. It's hard to recognize the air that we're swimming in. And that's part of this radicalizing discovery and pulling apart, like, what are these unuseful myths? It took me a long time to do a lot of work on looking at like, this is actually getting in the way of what I'm really desiring. Pursuing my craft in this way and following this structure that has been laid out to me since I was a kid actually gets in the way of wanting to be a creative person. I find it really spiritually difficult to be creative when I am pursuing in this dogmatic, hyper masculine, and I don't mean that in like in the gender sense as much as I mean it in this sort of like militarized sense that's explicit in this film,
like toxic masculinity.
Yeah, toxic, this, and really it's amazing how militarized it is, and how a lot of like there's a mix, I think, but like in that pursuit of discipline, that like the time in this, like when Terrence has him come at 6 o'clock, even though it starts at 9. But that's a good thing. That's, he internalizes it as, this is something that I need to learn how to do to be the greatest. And the over rehearsing and the pushing your body past the literal physical wounds and the blood, like those are all things that I also internalized and felt like that's the path. But again, I've had to recover to be like, no, I can't do my best work if I'm bleeding. I can't do my best work if one thing I loved is how they show in Andrew, he starts to deny any human experience, his relationship with the girl. He like breaks up with his girlfriend. He has no friends. My experience was like, how the fuck am I supposed to be an actor or a writer if I'm not confronting life What are you going to write or use for your toolbox? And it's such a misaligned, deeply inherited idea that, like, this is the path for an artist to become great. What the fuck is he going to do music about? And I like that they have it embodied in the character of Terrence because, you know, it's interesting what you were saying, Kelly. I was thinking about the ending, and my interpretation this go round was that there's something subtler happening. My interpretation of Terrence, and it's also fascinating that this is 2014, pre-Me Too, pre-us as a society even beginning to grapple with calling accountability on these abusive figures, pre-kind of like the reconstruction of cancel culture. So that last scene where he's actually been held accountable in a very real way for his fucking actions, which is pretty big because that rarely happens. And he sits there with Andrew and he's justifying it. And you see his own psychology. Like, I still was like, how much is he believing his own bullshit? And I thought the genius of the script is that in that moment, I thought, well, he really believes his own bullshit. He inherited this. He kind of believes that he really needed to get the next bird. And like the stuff that he says in that scene where he's just, there were such great lines. I never had a Charlie Parker, but I will never apologize for how hard I tried.
Right.
I believed him in that moment. And then the flip is at the end when he convinces him again to come and play for him. As an abuser, as a groomer, as a manipulator so brilliantly does, he pulls him back into his fold. And I, as an audience, was like, oh, maybe they got me. And he turns to him, and just as they're about to start, he's like, I know it was you who fucked me up. And you're like, no. This man knows what a devil he is. He's just a straight up abuser. Like, that's what I got in that moment. I was like, he actually straight up is sociopathic, but like really nasty, abusive. And I don't think he wanted the guy to be the next bird. But then when he comes back and he breaks that mold, there's this moment where he watches him playing, and I think there's this click. He almost was like, fuck, I could actually pursue my own bullshit. Like, I don't think he believed it until that moment. And then he took advantage, as Capital does. And like,
I think it's both. I think he believes his own bullshit and he's a sociopathic abuser. I think like whatever like talent, passion he had for conducting music, jazz, and then his pathological need to subjugate people and wield power and dominate people sort of got mixed together, and he came up with this fucked up ideology where he's like, I can do whatever I want to my students because maybe it will produce one of the greatest musicians of all time. I think like that's just like the fucked up justification he's created for himself. But you're right. At the end, he's not trying to push Andrew to help him. He is just like, I am going to destroy this kid's career because this kid destroyed my career. And then you're right. At the end, he's like, oh shit, it worked. He's like, I did it. Oh my God. I just broke this kid.
When he fucked him like that and he was like, I know what you did. We're about to play a song that you don't fucking know. Like, I'm going to make you look like the biggest idiot in front of thousands of people. It ignited an I don't give a fuck in him. I think that's really what happened. He was like, fuck this guy. I don't care. I am doing what, and I think that's what we saw. And when he didn't care anymore, he just flew. And then Fletcher, I think he was kind of turned on by that. Like, oh, a guy, because Fletcher doesn't give a fuck about anybody, like, and he was like, oh, a guy that has met my match. And also it was this thing where he's in public. Like, if that was in a rehearsal, he would have beat the shit out of him, but he's in front of thousands of people. He can't be like, hey, stop it, I
love thinking about the audience at that performance, just like leaning over to one another, like, I think there's something going on between the conductor and the drummer. There's some serious tension.
Well, and importantly as well, they are not students. By that point, because he's been fired, his status has been demoted. And so it does also offer a change in their dynamic, in their relationship. When he meets, he does have all the power. And so it's interesting that the rest of the musicians on stage kind of go along and they're like, oh, we're going to play our gig. And I just don't think, I think Fletcher doesn't have the same power that he had, which is a great choice as well in this shift in the relationship. I just wanted to briefly say back to like that, the moment that you brought up where we find out that the student at the end, we find out that Sean Casey had hung himself. But the story that we first learn, which is really, really important, is this pretty moving monologue that Terrence gives about his student who he finds out had passed. But the story he tells his orchestra is that this really talented musician who no one saw his potential, and he took him under his wing and he put him through this kind of rigor that they're all going through. He made him great, and he went on to play at Lincoln Center, and he was such a beautiful musician, and he died in a car accident, and I want you to hear his music. That's a straight lie, and he knows it's a lie. And whether the reason for why he tells that lie, I think, is really complex, and it's given such a nuanced performance, but it's important that it's a choice and a lie, which is why I do think that for me, he knew what he was doing. Like, I think these abusers do know, even though they're part of a bigger system. And I think that choice in the writing tells us that, and made a choice to say there's a choice in the lie and there's a choice in the illusion of it. And the illusion is so important, right? Because he is choosing to tell that story to manipulate this room of students who I truly believe, I do think he's treating them all like equal. Like, Andrew thinks he's special, but I think he has this relationship he has with Andrew with all of these other students. And he's just getting off on, like, making them all think one of them could be special, and, like, maybe he'll take his chance on any of them. And you see that kind of manipulation over and over again. And it's the manipulation we internalize.
I was just going to say there are two capitalistic traits or themes I picked up on in this movie. The first one was Fletcher discovering Neiman one day in practice, sees his potential, puts him in the band, and then and I kind of think of it similar to getting a job in like the corporate workforce, like for me at least, where I initially get the interview, I'm made to feel like I'm special and I have something that other people don't. But then the moment I'm in, all I'm told is what I'm doing wrong. And there's like little flickers of, oh, good job, this or that. But more so, and I'm not saying every work environment I've been in that has been like this. I'm just saying like a majority of the work environments I've been in have been like this, you know, and I feel like it was the same exact thing with Whiplash, where he was built up to believe like he was one of these geniuses, like these unfound geniuses. And then the moment he's put in the band, like there's a little bit where he lets him practice and he's like, I got the next Charlie Parker here. And then immediately flips and throws a chair at him, brings him to tears. There's that like really abusive, painful to watch scene where like for hours, he's just cycling the three drummers. Play as fast as you can, play as fast as you can. That almost brought me to tears. That and the car accident scene. Like,
and that happens right after he gives that monologue.
Oh, about Sean Casey?
It's like immediately after he's like crying, and they're all like, oh, and then he does what you're saying, which I agree was horrific.
The way they set up the whole Fletcher and Andrew relationship, just from that opening scene, which you were mentioning, Kelly, where he discovers Andrew, I wrote down that Andrew is desperately looking for someone to validate his talent, and Fletcher is looking for someone desperate. Because, like, immediately he starts fucking with him. He's like, did I tell you to stop playing? Did I tell you to start playing again? You know, he's trying to see, like, how much power can I wield over this kid? Did this kid already have too much agency? Oh, no, he doesn't have any agency. In fact, he is absolutely desperate to please me. This will work perfectly for my Machiavellian plans. And you know, every scene with the studio band is another opportunity for Fletcher to wield his power and his status over these students. The whole, like, who's playing out of tune scene, you know, which is so brutal.
oh, yeah.
Not helping, not teaching, just psychological abuse. Just who is out of tune. If you can't tell me, that means that you're all fucking terrible, because you should know who's out of tune.
Yeah, and again, he sends that one student out. When he does that, he sends out the student who was not out of tune and turns to the other one and says, you were, but he didn't know, so that's even worse. And again, he's like, anybody could be the greatest in here, but also only one of you can. It's so crazy. And so what happens in, like you're saying, Kelly, in the corporate world, in all these workplaces, because when they keep a large amount of people unemployed, they can pull from anyone, and we don't have any power.
And Fletcher absolutely knows, like, part of this conversation of, like, does Fletcher know how manipulative he's being? He absolutely does. Because the first studio band scene, he pulls Andrew aside in the hallway and is like, tell me about your life. What does your dad do? What about your mom? You know, like, don't worry about it. Just go in, just have fun. Just have fun. And then the first thing he does is use all of the information that he got from Andrew to just abuse the shit out of him. He says, Mommy left Daddy when she figured out he wasn't Eugene O'Neill, which is honestly a sick burn. Very funny if it wasn't so abusive. So yeah, this is like a man who has achieved this status, and that's another big part of what I think this movie has to say, is specifically about the arts world and commercial arts hierarchy. There are these people in positions of power, whether they be in like artistic institutions or within like the business apparatus of the art world, that are gatekeepers. And, you know, sometimes maybe they have something valuable to offer. Sometimes they don't, you know. It's very much a system that is perpetuated by capitalism. It is a hierarchy and status and class-based system. And it's incredibly destructive. And it really hurts the artists, who are the ones actually creating the art, who are the ones actually doing the labor to make the art that people get to watch, to see, to experience. But we have these gatekeepers that are just ascribed so much status. And I thought that was they depicted that so well in this movie, that like, oh, Fletcher's like famous. If you get on his good side, you could be in the core at Lincoln Center. And that's why everyone is so desperate and so competitive for his validation.
The other thing is, I feel like capitalism, like affecting women maybe a little more specifically, or me as a woman, is in this movie. There's a lot of comment. Well, one, it's an all male band. And two, there are a lot of like homophobic comments, a lot of like, he calls them pussies a lot. Hey ladies, like things like
milk
that.
The cunt.
Which,
that's like how they
milk the cunt.
Drops the F word several times.
That was so disgusting. Milk the cunt. So the thing is, there's an even double meaning, like a double impact on like women. I'll just speak for myself, like me as a woman, like, you know, where only men can handle this. God forbid if you can't, you're a fucking cunt that we milk, you know. Sorry, that's so crude.
Well, and it was almost like it was so intense that it was such a great way to see like performative toxic masculinity, because it was like, this was like football, this was like NFL, this was like so tough, and you're like, you're playing jazz music.
Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting because you can see when there's sort of the misinterpreted, that the idea that like to become a girl boss is just to like take on this toxic masculine attitude, but just be a woman doing it. Even in writing, even in my own writing practice, I've had to like undo some of that thinking, like sit down, set a goal, set your schedule, like how much do you want to write, get it done, 3 acts, like let's go. And it's like, actually no. And I can use some of that, and I really believe in balance. Like I think some of that's useful to me to like, okay, get to the writing even when I'm terrified, but some days I'll just like go and be like, okay, I'm here, so now I'm gonna sit and nap, or I'm going to just like carve out time to sit and daydream. And like that to me feels like the balance between them, I guess if we're going to say feminine and masculine, but none of that, there's no room for that in this. So I'm curious where the music really comes from. And there is that moment where you see Terrence when he's been fired and Andrew finds him in the jazz club. And it is the only time you see it, like, it was kind of fascinating because he's playing the piano and he looks like he's really enjoying it. There was something interesting there of like, oh, he's actually like, maybe there's an artist inside this drill sergeant of a man.
Well, I mean, we all start as artists, you know, and then either the trauma or the abuse or the desperation or the grind or whatever just wears on you in one way or another, and you either, you know, turn out like a Terrence Fletcher, or you turn out like, you know, potentially like an Andrew Neiman or a Sean Casey. It's very hard to strike that balance. I know, like I mentioned it earlier, but after 8 years in LA, of like just writing and performing and trying to do as much as I could, I hated it. I fucking hated it. I didn't like, I sat down to write scripts. I sat down to tape auditions. I sat down to work on comedic material. And I was like, I hate this. I don't want to look at this. I hate being creative. I hate having to do this. I hate that I've been doing so much for so long and don't have, that career to hang my hat on. And it completely robs you of your creative passion and your love. And honestly, getting into anti-capitalist theory and material analysis and unpacking how these systems operate, especially like putting within my context of like the entertainment industry, that was the most healing thing for me as a creative person, was recognizing and learning about how these structures are put in place, what the pressure, like how these structures put pressure on both the business and on individuals, and then being able to take a step back and looking at that and being like, oh, I feel this shitty because like this system makes you feel shitty because it's built in a way to make you feel terrible all the time. Like if you're not producing enough, if you're not achieving enough, if you haven't gotten the X, Y, or Z thing. So yeah, I mean, like I just, anytime someone's like talking about like, man, I feel it, like being an artist is tough, I'm like, you should honestly like read Marx, because it helped me rediscover my creativity.
I think you're getting at the core of something here that we're kind of like, it's like this movie shows us how it's the obsession with getting the one Charlie Parker. And like, okay, maybe you have to kill hundreds to get the one. But like, the truth is, maybe the pursuit of getting the one is killing hundreds, and you could have hundreds of brilliant artists if you fucking let go of trying to like murder everyone for this one mythological creator, And that's one of my favorite things about like TikTok, or just like the expansion of people being able to do their own shit. You're like, yeah, it was so much easier to put forward that like there's only like a handful of like really talented singers, or like go on, you're like, shit, people are brilliant. There are so many brilliant things happening, and it's my dream that just like there's more microphones being passed around, there's more opportunities to be on stages. Like the hard part is, because of capitalism, it's such a limited place to soar. So we are fighting. I mean, I think even though they don't talk about that, it's like there's a reason for the competitive fight, is because resources as a result of this system are scarce and funding is scarce, and there is only one Lincoln Center. But yeah, liberate the fucking masses.
Yeah, I definitely think when I think about the 4 categories of goods, and how there's like rivalrous goods, I felt like in this movie from the get-go, Fletcher just primes everyone, including Neiman, to see themselves as a rivalrous good,
Yeah.
I feel like there's this thing. Yeah, it's funny. I feel like there's this thing with art where no one really needs it. Like, you need water, you need clothes, you need food, you need shelter. Like, art is more like of a luxury thing. I'm saying that's how I feel. That's at least how I feel like it's been communicated to me. That's why a lot of times parents are not, I mean, mine certainly are not, are not supportive of artistic endeavors, because it's like, yeah, no one really needs an actor, but you need a doctor. So I feel like the fight to really be the best and get those opportunities that are so scarce is like even more intense. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
no, I think like, that makes a lot of sense. Like that is certainly how art is framed in our cultures. Like this, not necessary, but so if you want to do it, we're going to make you go through even more hoops and pay even more to pursue this thing, because we don't have a place, even though I think it is up there with one of the basic human needs, which I don't think is what, I don't think you're saying it's not, Kelly. I think what I got from what you were saying is like, that's how it's framed.
Yeah.
And it makes it really difficult, because we know the statistics of when arts education is introduced to children at a young age. It's like necessary to your emotional, spiritual growth. Our society actually suffers deeply when you remove the arts, but that's not something that capital or our culture values.
And Kelly, you also said scarcity, which I think is really important in terms of talking about arts careers, because we're also in our society taught that there is a massive scarcity in being able to attain an arts career. So that leads to something like your parents not being supportive and wanting you to be a doctor because they're like, well, I know how competitive it is. I know how difficult. I know how few people get to do it for a living. So like, yeah, just like go do something that's like safer and boring, which is such a shame because you think about how many people would just be artists if they had their material needs met, you know, or how many people would do fucking anything if they just had their material needs met. You know, I was talking to my partner recently and I was like, we were at Trader Joe's and I was like, man, if someone paid me like $80,000 a year to work at Trader Joe's, that sounds tight. That sounds fucking cool. Like, I would love that. Like, this looks like a fun job. And if I got to eat and be comfortable and not have to worry, I'd be more than happy to do this all the time. You know, like, if we lived in a society where people had healthcare, people had housing, basic necessities, food, water, all that stuff, like, there'd be so many more people that are like, yeah, I work a couple days a week at a restaurant, and the rest of my time I'm just like booping around making art, doing theater, doing stand-up, whatever, because like I'm not sweating my material circumstances. You know, all of that stuff is not getting to me, so I have the freedom to actually just like live a more creatively holistic life. I mean, I think I was reading recently like a study during, it was like the pandemic maybe, but like the amount of creative output that was happening during the pandemic when people, you know, like were just stuck at home.
Yeah.
And I saw someone online being like, I think this is a huge testament to the fact that like we're all creative people and we all just want to be creative. And the only thing that is stifling that is the fact that we have to like pay the fucking rent every single month.
Fuck yeah. We've been touching on this a bit, but I want to just dive into the term itself of perfectionism because it's something that I've been in like long-term recovery from and deal with daily. But there was a quote from Damien Chazelle around the time that this film came out about the hyper perfectionism in this film. And he says it's an existential rage, as he's talking about the demanding, abusive music school, and also Terrence, that he loves the music so much that he creates this perfect version of it in his head that human beings can never quite live up to because we're imperfect. His rage stems from that. It's a rage at being human and the rage of not being superhuman. It's interesting because I think he's placing it in this sort of rage at maybe something about inherently about being human, but I would place that sort of demand on being superhuman again back towards our material world and our circumstance, because I think, Frank, you just articulated it beautifully of that being out of the way. We might have a certain demand of like wanting to get to a certain level, but when you don't have to like feed a family off of your art, I don't know, it may change. But I think there's an element where we have to change that culture itself. And I know that like it's one of those catch-22s where you just, as you're trying to unpack this and you're just like, but I thought being perfect was going to help me, like, I thought pursuing perfection would at least like get me closer to my best version of myself. And at least in my experience, and I think in this film, the reality is that like pursuing hyper perfection actually deteriorates you, results in like, for me, it was an eating disorder. For me, it was, you know, shutting down social relationships, just again, like emptying of the crayon, as I call it, like your creative crayons, your toolbox, and emptying of that in pursuit of hyper perfection. So that I would say like it's actually does the opposite. I think it kills you.
The other thing is, I feel like, you know, it's interesting that jazz is picked for this movie because it is such a loose, sometimes out of rhythm art form where there is need for a lot of like spontaneity and even like, dare I say, like an out of tune player. Like, you know, there is a lot of busyness and craziness that is in jazz, at least from what I've interpreted from listening to it. It's not like this rigid machine. Like I feel like Fletcher treats his players like they're all cogs in a machine at a factory that have to, I don't know how in hell like those people were still able to be creative, because that would have absolutely shut me down.
Yeah. I was really aware this watch of these two white men in this story about jazz and how when Andrew is in his first class and he has a black jazz teacher, And I'd say the majority of the students, it's pretty mixed, but maybe the majority are not.
The
Maybe
three drummers are white guys, which that really stuck out to me this
Yeah.
time. I'm like, you're telling me all
Yeah.
three of the jazz drummers are white guys in this movie? Okay.
Yeah, wow, that's such a good point.
The way Terrence like barges in, I was just so aware, and how demeaning he was to the other teacher and how rude he was to that teacher. It just it just felt, and maybe this is also post La La Land and knowing a lot of the critique on Damien Chazelle and that's a whole other conversation with that film, but this just felt really like, that stood out to me, but also like made sense for the character, but it was never really touched on. I kind of felt like it wasn't something that was necessarily, I don't know how aware the writer director was of that, or if that was a symptom of his own.
Yeah, I had the same thought about the three white drummers. I was like, this is a critique on how it's a class-based system on who can actually afford and achieve getting into one of these elite conservatories. Like having these three white guys as opposed to like, you know, someone from a different ethnic group. I don't think that's what Chazelle was going for, but
No, I don't think so either.
no. On that note, this is the point in our episode, Kelly, where we like to give awards to the movie we're talking about. So we have 3 awards to give. This will be an interesting one today. The first award we give out is Best Politics. Goes to the character with the best politics in the movie. I mean, I feel like it's got to be between Andrew's dad and
His girlfriend.
his girlfriend.
Yeah, we didn't. I guess this is good because we didn't really touch on the dad much, and I thought he gave such a great performance and was also a really important character because he kind of represented that another artist myth, right? Like those who can't teach, and that trope is certainly used by Terrence to like manipulate Andrew cruelly, as we mentioned. But I thought there was such a stunning moment at the end. You mentioned the demonic cut to Terrence. Similarly, there was this incredible shot where as Andrew's doing his like breakout drum solo at the end, you see his father looking from backstage, and it's just this unbelievable close-up on his face where he like kind of is like, I lost him. Like it's this struggle with his dad. And I really feel for parents who want to give their kids it's almost like the parents' inability to a certain point being put up against a system. Like you want your kids to have everything, you want to care for them. And he just loved his son so much and was there for him. But I don't know, it gave me empathy for my parents, especially my mom, who wanted to give me so many opportunities and would bring me as a young kid to like act as a child in some of these companies. And like it's almost impossible to parent perfectly. And you just saw him lose his son to this person in this moment, and it was heartbreaking. But I think I would actually give it to the girlfriend. That being said.
Me too. I would give it to her too because she was a lot more free and open to possibilities. Like even in that breakup scene when he was like, look, I don't think we should see each other anymore, and this is why, like, and he says all the reasons, and he's like, you're gonna stop me from becoming the best, from becoming, my dream. And she was like, really? Do you know that? Do you know that for a fact that I would stop you? And like she was really challenging. I feel like she held like a level of hope of like, there is another way to go about this. And it was like implying, I think, that she would have been really supportive of him like achieving his dream and stuff, just not in that way.
I mean, their first date together scene, which I really, really love. In fact, like I thought on this watch, Melissa Benoit is so lovely in this role.
Agree.
Just
Incredible.
so present, so easy, like
Yes.
not working too hard. And I think like, the other performances, obviously Teller and J.K. Simmons are, huge. So I think we forget how good she's being over here.
Yeah.
And that first date had like, it really reminded me of that first scene from The Social Network where he's kind of like, talking about, oh, so you just applied to Fordham for like no reason. Like, did you want to go there? Do you know what you want to do? Do you have any passion? Do you understand that I'm at the best music conservatory in the country? And she just like wasn't playing that game, and which is like really impressive to see from like a ostensibly 21-year-old, someone who's like, yeah, I kind of like don't really give a shit about that stuff that you give a shit about. I'm not like, I'm not adhering to the pressures of the system. I'm not thinking about status or clout or any of that stuff. I'm just going to school, figuring it out, working at a movie theater. So she was already like, I'm not buying into this system that you have bought into so hard.
Yeah, I agree. Give it to her.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our next award goes to the character with the worst politics. I think it's a little obvious, but maybe we want to give some contenders just to offer some competition to Terrence, right? Give him some of his own medicine.
Honestly, the only person I can think of with worse politics, and they're not even a character in this movie, would be the dean of the Schaefer Conservatory of Music, whoever is employing Terrence Fletcher, known abuser. Just letting him destroy these students, but no, that's just a joke.
Oh wait,
it's got to be Fletcher.
As we're saying this, because correct, I was like, best politics we would have to just also put as a contender might actually win. The parents of, I know that we didn't see them, but we did see the lawyer, like the people who actually brought Terrence to account.
Oh sure, yeah.
Like really important. Kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Again,
Sean
really amazing.
Casey's parents?
Yes, thank you. Really amazing that they did that in 2014. Like Harvey Weinstein's out there wilding, you know, I may have didn't produce this, but saw it.
No, but that was such a good point you made, that this was pre-Me Too, because like this was like maybe the last year you could make this movie, and Terrence Fletcher he's not already in jail like 4 years ago. You know what I mean?
Maybe, but also like I just mean that it's like honest. Yes, that he's not in jail.
Yeah.
But honestly, I feel like what was weird about watching it was he was held to more accountability than I feel like now you would have made this movie and they'd be like, it's got to be about cancel culture and like, are people going too hard on him? Like, is he really that, like, you know, where it's just an honest movie about like, no, he's fucking abusive. He's abusive. And here's how.
So is there anyone else with worse politics, or it's Fletcher? We're saying Fletcher.
Fletcher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our last award is Best Supporting Character / Spinoff. So this goes to your favorite supporting character and maybe a spinoff that they would appear in.
Since we brought it up, I'm curious about like the dynamics of some of the other classrooms and like, is there possibly something to kind of go explore the dynamic between like this fucking Terrence and like his relationship to the other teachers in the school, and exploring the tensions around when you have a fucking white male teacher in a position to just appropriate jazz in this way and like treat everyone like utter trash. Just like, what are those conversations? What's that world?
That's a good one. I was thinking like all of the scenes where like J.K. Simmons, where Fletcher and Neiman are like having it out like on stage in front of people, with the car accident scene at that show and then the final scene. I'm just like so curious what everyone else is thinking, because they're like, what the fuck is going on with these two? Like, this is so unprofessional. So like I love when like in the final performance when the stand-up bassist leans over when when Neiman can't play the drums, and he's like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, these are so many other people who have their own lives, their own careers that they're trying to pursue, and like these two men are just like having it out in front of each other.
I knew it was you. What?
Like, what?
Oh my God. I would say personally, like, you know, I think Miles Teller was nominated for like supporting character. Like, so like in a lot of ways, like I feel like he is even though he's the protagonist, like I can see where he's also a supporting role. Like, so I feel like I would personally love to see a spinoff. Like, what happens to him after? Like, does he reach all of his successes, but now he's like a Fletcher type, or does he find the balance? Does he find a way to be great, but also, you know, have his health and well-being and relationships intact? Or was that like his last performance ever and he's a teacher now like his dad? You know, like it would just, I think that would be really,
or maybe he teaches and performs and he's found
Right.
a nice balance. I agree. I think that would be really interesting. I wanted to mention, if you haven't seen it, there is a 20-minute short film version of this.
Oh, yes.
Which is really interesting to see, because the short film version is generated from scenes from the actual film, but it's not Miles Teller. It's another actor who I unfortunately don't know the name of. I didn't look that up, but is really...
Johnny Simmons.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw it. It was good. It went to Sundance. That was like the short film that got him the funding from Sony to make the actual movie.
And pretty brilliant because he already had the full script, and so just pulled those kind of core scenes out, which I think is really telling. If you have a great script, you can probably pull out a short from it. But yeah, I love seeing another performance, and perhaps maybe I'll offer I would like to see that actor's version of this film. It was just kind of, I couldn't help but think about like the political dynamics of that, of like, shit, that's gotta feel not great.
Oh my God, no.
To be like, everybody else was taken, but they needed a star because capitalism to fill that role. And like, you understand that's part of the system. But again, it felt like the rotating drummer chair to me. There was just something, not to keep going back to like the army of the unemployed, where it's like, yeah, thank you for like getting us through that, your performance in the Sundance thing, but like we need a star in order to sell tickets, and that's this industry.
Miles has more followers.
Yeah.
Miles Teller wasn't really much of a star though yet, I feel. When
I think
he was that was like his big breakout movie.
He was on the he was coming up.
I think he was already coming up. I think he had done Rabbit Hole, right? And then
he had done Rabbit Hole. I think he might have had done the Divergent.
Yeah, I think he had been filming Divergent.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was like becoming a commodity. He was becoming a commodity. He was the buzz was hot, people were talking, industry was alight. They were like, "Have you heard of this young kid named Miles Teller? We have to put him in everything because everyone else says that they're putting him in their things."
And he's great, but the other actor was great too. It just made me, again, I think so many people are fucking great, despite what Terrence tells us.
To that point, I think that ended up happening to Miles Teller as well, because then with La La Land, like, it was pretty public that there was a plan for Miles Teller and Emma Watson, to be in that movie. In fact, that article that you read from, I read that one too. They talk about it in that article. And then they swapped him out for Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, who are bigger stars. But that movie was not good. So, I mean, in my opinion. So, maybe it saved him.
Wow, and I'm just remembering the whole thing with La La Land and Moonlight, and just going back to like, that was like Terrence walking into that jazz room, like, oof. Part two. Maybe we'll cover that movie at another point. All right. Well, thank you so much for bringing this film to the pod, unpacking this with us. I think this was a really deep conversation.
Thank you so much for having me too. Like, I'm just a really big fan of the podcast and like just the overall concept, and like listening to other podcasts of yours, it's honestly opened my eyes a lot. Like, even with this movie, like, I didn't even know to think of it from a capitalistic standpoint. I used to think in a very literal sense, where the movie has to like be about a corporation and this and that. And it's really brought a level of awareness for me, like all the way down to open mics and how open mics are ran, and like how this can really get internalized down into a smaller scale. Like, so I don't want to be like corny, is a little life changing for me, like life eye-opening for me. I don't know how to not sound corny about saying that.
It sounds very genuine and sincere, and it really means a lot. So thank you very much for saying that.
Yeah. And before we let you go, we would just love to hear a little more from you about how in your daily life you strive to, practice your values, if they're anti-capitalist or whatever they may be at this point in your life. Is there something, a life practice you engage with that you want to share?
Yeah, I practice free cycling. So I, with the extra things I have, I don't try to make money from selling it online or like selling it at a thrift store or a consignment shop or something. Like, I actually live next to a really bad neighborhood. I don't know if you've heard of the Tenderloin, but it's probably the worst neighborhood in San Francisco. It's like nothing I've ever seen, to be honest. And I recently moved, so there's like a lot of stuff that I don't need. So I'll just pack everything, whether it's canned food to clothing to extra blankets to whatever, and I put it in a bag and I just leave it on the street next to some people. And like, that just feels, I do that often, honestly. And I feel like it's such an easy way. Like, those are all non-rivalrous goods. Like, everyone has the right to have clothes and food and shoes and blankets. And, you know, like, it's just crazy that a price tag is put on needs, you know?
Yep.
So that like, I definitely have a long way to go. But those are like some things off the top of my head. I know I also like shop at thrift stores. I don't buy a lot of clothes in general. I like rewear a lot of stuff, but when I go to thrift stores, I like try my best to go to ones that are like independently owned, you know, not like a Goodwill or a Buffalo Exchange, like these corporate entities that are like masking as thrift stores. And then obviously, if it's a deli, like I try to do like a family owned deli and not like, I don't go to Starbucks. Ugh. I mean, their coffee's terrible, but also like, I much rather go to like a family owned coffee shop, you know, and support. Yeah. So those are some things like, I'm sure if I probably like delved in more, I would think of other things, but off the top of my head, like those are things that like are very much in like my daily practice.
Those were great suggestions. I mean, we only asked for one. I think you gave us like 4 or 5. So you killed the assignment. Thank you.
Yeah, you win. Terrence would be proud.
Oh man, I win.
Kelly, it was so nice meeting you. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, thanks for having us revisit this movie.
Like the best way to spend a Wednesday. Are you kidding? Like, I work in hospitality, so this is my Saturday, and I wouldn't want to like spend my day any other way. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you want to support the show and get access to our Patreon episodes, the link is in the episode description in your podcast player or at mvcpod.com.
Next week, we will be watching the 2007 iconic Batman movie, The Dark Knight.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.